Hi and welcome to this video where we are going to uncover the essentials of Model Context Protocol or MCP. MCP is an open protocol that standardizes how applications provide context to LLMs. In this video we'll dive into 3 points. The first point is the purpose behind MCP itself, exploring the reasons why MCP was created and the problems it solves. The second point is what MCP actually is, a clear explanation of its principles and the key features. And the third point is how to use MCP today. A step-by-step guidance to integrate MCP, for example, in Visual Studio Code. Wherever, if you are a developer, a researcher, or simply curious about this new stuff, this video will equip you with all the fundamental knowledge you need to get started with MCP. So let's embark on this journey together. So let's start with a quick introduction to Model Context Protocol or MCP. We are going to split the content in 3 points. The first point will be why, the need for MCP, what are the main problems that solve. Then we're going to see what, understanding what is an MCP, the main features, etc. And finally, we're going to see how we can first use MCPs in some toolings or IDs and how we can develop an MCP using C#. So we're going to start with the why, the need for an MCP. This is the typical AI application architecture with a single agent. We have the users that communicate with an AI agent that usually have one or more tools and also can have the use of prompts and also memory to maintain the chat history and the conversation and the context between the different toolings. The problem with that is the following. Imagine that we are GitHub, and as you know, GitHub offers features for handle code, issues, pull requests, and more. If they want to integrate with all the various AI-powered tools or IDs, like VS Code, Cursor, Set, Client, and others, to achieve this, they must develop dedicated integrations tools tailored to each individual tool or ID, implementing them step by step for compatibility. So this is a different implementation for every different tool. And this is the pain points for developers. For tool developers, if GitHub plans to integrate with the top AI application, they must create and implement integrations individually for each one, addressing its specific requirements and features. And for AI application developers, is similar. If Rider, for example, seeks to integrate with the GitHub Visual Studio GitHub Copilot tool, they won't be able because can reuse it directly. Instead, they need to develop a new integration tailored to their platform from scratch, cannot reuse or integrate with something existing. So there is demand for an standardization. We need for a universal protocol that streamline AI integrations, reduce the fragmentations. There are until now fragmentations and the same implementation repeated several times by different platforms, and we want to promote interoperability. So here is where appear MCP, the MCP concept. What is an MCP? MCP is an open protocol that enables a seamless integration between LM applications and your data source, your tools. It's something similar to the API concept. API standardize how web applications interact with the backend, with servers, database, using services, etc. And MCP standardize how AI applications interact with external systems, using mostly tools, but also accessing to data and have the opportunity to reuse prompts, and also using sampling, that is a concept that allows to invoke and execute LLM code from the client's tool. The timeline is intense but pretty short because this started on November from the past year, 2024, with Anthropic announcing MCP and set supported MCP2. In January, for example, of this year, 2025, Cursor supported MCP, and in March, VS Code started the support for MCP2. The trend, as you can see in the picture, has been growing up faster and quickly. Because this picture, before Before MCP and without MCP, we had the different toolings and different clients just creating an integration and an implementation to communicate with the different data source or tools in this case. Like for example, VS Code have an integration to Jihad that was different from the cursor because cannot reuse everything, etc. Now with MCP, we have, for example, a GitHub MCP server, and all the AI applications reuse the exactly same MCP server via MCP protocol. So with MCP, we standardize AI development. For AI application developers, that means that can connect the application to any MCP with no additional work. And for tools or API developers, can build an MCP server once and see adoption everywhere. So it's used a single implementation. The general architecture is something like that. We have the host, like the different IDs, tools, for example, VS Code, Cloud, etc., that use the MCP protocol to communicate with one or several MCP servers, and the MCP server is what get access to different data, the data source. Could be a local data source, could use web APIs to connect via internet to remote service, etc. The core components of an MCP are three ones: the MCP host, that are the programs like Cloud, IDs, Visual Studio Code, or AI tools that want to access to data through an MCP. Then we have the MCP clients, that are the protocol clients that maintain a one-by-one connection with the servers. And the key concept today, because it's something that we are going to see later with more details, I mean, we are going to create a new MCP server using C# later, are lightweight programs that expose specific capabilities through the standard model context protocol. Okay, then we have to talk about the transport, because there are two standard transport mechanisms for client-server communication. How the MCP client and MCP server communicate, okay, can use standard in and standard out communication, or HTTP with server-send event. Okay, in the first way, the server could only run in local. The client launches the MCP server as a sub-process and receive JSON RCP mishap on its standard input and write response to its standard output. This is the first way, and the second one is use HTTP with SSE. The server could run in both local and remote. Must provide two endpoints. The first one is an endpoint for clients to establish a connection and receive message from the server. Another one, a regular HTTP post endpoint for clients to send message to the server. So the server features are these ones: an MCP server expose resource, tools, and expose prompts templates. The tools are small functions and tools that can be invoked by the client. For example, in the case of GitHub, search a PR or search between issues, or for example, send a message with all the context to create a new issue, for example. And can also expose prompt templates to reuse, and can also expose results. The results are data or content exposed by the server, like for example could be files or database records, and the prompt templates are user invoked prompts to interact with the model. So how we can use an MCP? So the first point will be install one application that support MCP integrations. We are going to see later in this link all the available applications that we can use, and then we can install and configure an MCP server. There are several MCP servers, so let's take a quick look. We have used several applications like Cloud Desktop, Clean, or VS Code. There are several MCP servers that we can use, and VS Code already support MCP now. So let's take a quick look to all these. So this is the main GitHub site where you can find all the information about the model context protocol, where you can get access to things like the specification, documentation, that is fine. Also, all the available SDKs like TypeScript, Python, Java, Kotlin, or C#. And also, you can access to the implementation of every of that language. We have a huge list of servers. There are really interesting servers to official ones to communicate and get data source from things like GitHub, GitLab, for example, Sentry, etc. But we can include a huge list of third-party servers to do things, to communicate with more services and data source, like for example, okay, Heroku, we can Grafana, we can communicate with, for example, Perplexity, etc., etc. So this is the use list, and now the next question is how we can integrate it in Visual Studio Code. We have official documentations to do that. In the Visual Studio Code documentations, we have a specific section about MCP servers and how to use MCP servers in VS Code. We already know what is an MCP, or the capabilities, the different ways of communications, etc. So to add an MCP, it's easy. We can create a VS Code /MCP JSON file in our workspace, and then we can include a servers list. This is the name of the server, and typically we are going to use these 4 parameters that are: the type is the server type connection. We have seen that we have 2 options. The command, it's depending how you will start the server. If we are going to use Docker, if we are going to use npx, etc. Theirs are the array of arguments passed to the command to start the server. And environment are mostly environment variables. Typically are API keys or access tokens or similar. So let's go to Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code already support, the MCP servers. We can use the model context server with VS Code. Go into the settings, and if you search by MCP, you can find a checkbox to enable the integration. I already have been using exactly the same in the insider version during some time, so you can use both of them. By the way, you can have side-by-side installed both versions, and to get the insider version, you don't need any special conditions, so you can use access to it directly. Once you have this, the next step is, as we have seen in the documentation, include a server. So we can get access to the server and search by something. Let's start by the simplest one that I know, that is the time MCP server. That is just an MCP server with really basic information, just getting the current time and be able to convert time between different time zones. So if we go, for example, now here, once we enable, the MCP integration in VS Code, we have in VS Code 3 different modes now. The typical ask, where we can ask and maintain a conversation with Copilot. We can give, of course, context about our code, etc., or something. We have the edit mode to edit multiple files in this workspace. Now we have the new agent mode. With the new agent mode, we have a new option here where we can select tools. These tools comes from MCP servers. And if we go to the settings JSON file, I already included here one server, that is the time MCP server. The time MCP server explains the available tools, and then we have multiple options to install it. The recommendation is use EUP installation, but we can just have Python installed locally and use pip to install, the server locally, and then the same configuration can be used in Cloud, VS Code, etc. This is the settings to install the server using UUX, and we can use Docker and we can use pip. So we can just copy and paste in, the settings JSON file, and that's all. We can detect, the tool quickly. There are also an option to add an MCP directly from VS Code, allowing to choose between different options to install the MCP server, and we get some helps to just write these lines, but it's almost the same. So for example, I can ask, because I have some teammates working on Seattle, so I can ask something like, what is the time at Seattle? And now currently I don't have a MCP server now running. So The default information give me that, yeah, there are 9 hours of difference. So it gives you information about the time difference between the two time zones. I'm now in Spain, in Sevilla, and between Seattle now there are 9 hours of difference. But also I can activate, this server. I can run it in this way, just starting. We can see in the output in case there are any problem, and also here we can see an icon in case of have issues, like we can see in the documentation. In case of have any problem starting the server, you can see an icon like this, and taking a look to the output, you can see something like, for example, you don't have Python installed, or something cannot be fetched, or I don't know, something like that. And in base of that, we can just make changes to fix and do the necessary to start running the server. But if I repeat now the questions, now that the server is running, this will detect that, yeah, you have an MCP tool that can use answer to this question. If we expand, the tool that we'll use is the time MCP server, and we'll use the get current time tool. So as we have seen before, the MCP servers can have tools, can have prompts, etc. And between the different tools, the time MCP server have two tools, get current time and convert time. So if we continue, yeah, the current time is 9 and 10 on April 10, 2025. So I get a direct answer just using the get current time and using the conversion from this tool. If we include more tools, another MCP server with more information, like for example GitHub have an MCP server with several tools to do many things: push files, search repositories, search PRs, search issues, create issues, etc., etc. There are 26, yeah, 26 tools. And next we have the syntax to set up, to install. So we can use Docker, npx, we can just copy this, paste in, the setting files, for example, and set a GitHub personal access token that you can create easily, use accessing your user settings, and it's here. You have settings, developer settings, and there you can create a personal access token. Remember to use inputs in the settings files used to avoid to set and paste in a plain text the access token. You can see something like that here. For example, is creating an input to put the Perplexity API key, and then use the input here. So the input are prompted on first server start, and this is stored securely. So it's secure stored, and you are not posing by error anything. Okay, so we just do exactly the same step, copy the GitHub server, paste in the settings JSON file, just paste the access token, and once we have everything done, if we span the tools, now we have an MCP server GitHub with all the tools. We can filter tools, enable and disable if we want, but now imagine that I'm working in a .NET MAUI project and I'm integrating a title view, and in macOS something is not rendering as I expected. I can ask something like, are there any issue in the .NET MAUI repository related with title view and macOS? Again, there are search issues. This is now from the GitHub MCP server. We can continue, allow by this session, workspace, always, etc. And if I continue, we can see also the parameters that are using. Yeah, there are issues under the MAUI repository with title view and macOS. The issue is this one: title view content appears partly above the top of the screen. That could be pretty similar to what's happening to me. So it's a good opportunity to navigate to the issue here with this link and see what's going on, if there is a new workaround, if the issue is a work in progress and maybe could be fixed in the next service release, etc., etc. That's a good way to get information that in other way we cannot get, because yeah, this is information that it's happening also now in real time. Maybe this issue has been filled today. So we have seen how we can install and configure MCP servers in VS Code. In fact, this is actually the same that we can how we can install MCP servers in other tools like cloud, desktop, for example. Is using typically npx or docker and using modifying the settings JSON file. Remember that VS Code give a way to facilitate and help in this process, as we have seen before. And also we have the command line. We can use code with the add MCP command, passing all the information, the name, the command, etc., and the parameters. And this will do exactly the same that we had done manually, just copy and pasting in the settings JSON file, but we'll do it directly. Okay, and now we are going to jump to the most funny part of the video, where we are going to implement an MCP server. There are several ways to do that with different SDKs for TypeScript, Python, Java, Kotlin, and C#. We are going to focus on C#. And there are recommended tools like the generator MCP or the MCP inspector. We are going to take a look to the MCP inspector, that is an interactive developer tool used for testing and debugging the MCP server, and get access to all the prompts, all the tools, and be able to invoke the tools with the different parameters, etc. We will use it. So create an MCP server, it's easy. We need the latest VS Code version, .NET, and Node.js. We need to create a .NET console application and add the Nugget package model context protocol. Then implement the tool logic for the MCP server, debug and test it with the MCP inspector is my recommendation, and finally run in any AI application. And in our case, we are going to use VS Code with the agent mode. The starting point of our server will be the program class, where we are going to do some basic scaffolding to create the MCP server, configure the standard server's transport. We have seen before that we have different options, and tell the server how to search for the tools that are available in the running assembly. So the extension method that we are going to use is the add MCP server to create a server with Studio Server Transport to set the transport mode, and with tools from assembly we'll do the following. To create and define a tool, we're going to use the MCP server tool type attribute, and this method with tools from assembly will scan the assembly for classes with this attribute and register all the methods that use the MCP server tool attribute. So notice also that with the attribute MCP server tool, we need to define also a description. This description is important not only because it's what appears in Visual Studio when we span all the tools and can get access to fine descriptions to know what this tool is doing. That could contribute to understand better more than the tool name, but also is what will be used by the LLM to decide what tool to use. So this description is important. Before take a look to how to publish, let's take a look to different stuff. So first of all, the MCP inspector is something that looks like this. You can get access to this in the model context protocol / inspector inside GitHub. To use it, you can use npx model context protocol inspector, and here depends on your project. You can, in this case, with Node, but if you are using .NET, it's easy. Use the .NET run to run your server. We are going to take a look to this server that I created recently. It's a mobile, I call it mobile development MCP, but it's mostly an MCP designed to manage and interact with mobile device and simulators. So it's useful to get the list of emulators or simulators installed, the running ones, get, for example, the installed application, or install an application, launch an application, take screenshots, or do some UI automation, like interact with device via taps, swipes, or similar. And also it's really interesting for diagnostics. We can get logs, or we can use, for example, logcat to retrieve different logs from the device, So imagine that your application crashes after doing some specific action. We can use ads to GitHub Copilot using this MCP to get the logs, retrieve the logs, and then analyze it, searching what's going on and getting some suggestion. That sounds pretty good. So this is the project that we are going to use. It's inside my account, mobile dev MCP server, in case you want to get access to it. So let's jump to it to see how we create it. So let me collapse everything and close everything. We are going to start opening things one by one. And let's start taking a look to the project, because yeah, it's a console application. I use it net9 in this case, and the interesting thing is I'm using the package model context protocol. That's all that you need to create it. Then you need to create a program class. The main things in your program class is using the host to create an application builder, and inside the service, add the MCP server, add the way in how we are going to communicate. In this case, add a server transport that use standard in and standard out for the communication. And then if we want to register tools, prompts, there are extension methods to register with prompts from the assembly, with the tools from the assembly, etc. Then let's put the focus on tools. As I mentioned before, this MCP will allow us to access to simulators, device, Android, and iOS. So for example, in Android, we have the Android device tool. The first thing that we need to do in the class is use the MCP server tool type. This is the attribute that we need to use to expose all the content, all the methods that will be exposed as MCP tools, and that in the program, using this extension method, will scan to register in the server. Then we can create tools using the MCP server tool. It requires a name parameter, and the description is pretty interesting. For example, in this case, I'm not doing anything pretty special. I'm listing the Android device, the available Android device. So the first thing is we're using ADB, so check if ADB is installed or not. And then we process a command. And after process the command, we use format in, in a table. We format the content, passing the serial, the device name, the product, and the model to the output. We have several tools in this way. For example, boot a device, shut down a device. We can have several classes. For example, this is another one by diagnostics. I separate by class based on the area. So everything related with the device management is in one class, everything related with file management is in another, everything related with, for example, UI tools like interact with the UIs in another, etc. So this is, for example, for diagnostics, requesting to create a book report, and at the again use ADB to create the book report and getting it. So we have also app management. We have, for example, log tools to create and get access to the logs via logcat. We have, for example, tools to take screenshots, etc., etc. Something similar happened with iOS, but in this case, with iOS, we are using xcrun to get a list of simulators, format the content, etc. So now that we have seen the project, it's time to run, and test it with the MCP inspector. So we need to use this line from here, npx model context protocol inspector.net run. In the folder where we have our project, we just run it. Now it's starting the server, and the MCP inspector is up and running. So clicking the link, it's opening a browser where we can set environment variables in case you are using something like AP keys or similar. If not, tap the connect button. This is starting the server, and we can just list the tools. These are all the tools that we have, and we can access to any of these tools, like for example Android list device, and run the tools. Or in case we have some tools with parameters, like for example this one or this one, to get the logs and retrieve the logs from logcat, we can pass the device serial to identify the Android device that we want to use, in case there are more than one running, and the max lines, in case we want a maximum number of lines to retrieve. So this is a really interesting tool. We have also options to get access to resource, to prompts. We can also access to, in case one of your tools is also doing sampling. Okay, so once we have created MCP, we can configure it using the project. Just clone the project and copy this to the settings file that is mostly doing a .NET run of the project to run the server pretty easily. Can also copy, for example, the library and use the library, but also we can package and publish it. We can going to see it later. But now back to Visual Studio, and I have already installed the MCP server that we have created. This is our own server with all the tools. So now I have, for example, an Android emulator running, and I have an iOS simulator. I can ask, for example, things like what iOS simulators are installed in the machine. This detects that there is a tool, iOS list device, that comes from the MCP server mobile dev server, and we can run. And yeah, we get information. There are iOS simulators on your machine, like iPhone 16, 16 Pro, etc., with the versions 18.0.1, 18.2. Okay, that's pretty cool. And we can ask what are the Android emulator running, or if there is anyone running, or things like that. And yeah, again, detect other command, other tool from the MCP server. And yeah, there is a physical device with that number. The serial number is 12, blah, blah, blah. Okay, perfect. And we can ask what are the installed apps in the emulator. And we can ask directly what's the running in the running emulator, or we can copy, for example, the serial number to give more context. Yeah, and we can get a list of the installed applications. We can request to launch an application, like can you launch the .NET MAUI core test app in the running Android emulator? Okay, another tool that will launch the application. Voila, as you can see, it's launching a tool that we use to run the device test that we have in .NET MAUI. And we can continue in this way. For example, can you retrieve a log from the current running emulator? And we can use logcat and retrieve the log. Yeah. And then we can request, for example, in case of errors, if we are, for example, yeah, we have now a logcat. Okay, that's pretty cool. And imagine that we navigate now in this application and something crashed. We can use ask request to get the logs again and get information about the error and get context about what's going on. So we can get more possibilities now integrated from GitHub Copilot and allow to the LLM to get access to more context, more data source. In this case, all the source and information related with our emulator device, simulators, and interact with them. And that's pretty cool. So if we want, imagine to allow other developers to use this server, how we can distribute it. Well, it's time now to publish the MCP server. .NET make it simple to create a container image for any .NET application, and at the end, our MCP server is a console app. So all that we need to do is add the necessary configuration in the project. Enable the container support, add the container repository, and include some runtime identifiers. Then we can use the command line to use the .NET publish. And once we have done something like that, we can just configure the MCP server pretty similar to what we have done before with MCP servers like the Time server, the GitHub server, or our own mobile web server, using the settings file, setting the MCP server with the command docker and with the argument pointing to the published server. We can see how appear a new MCP server at every moment. Everyone is really excited about it. We can now use integrating our LMs data source in a simple way and reuse and just allow to reuse the MCP server in all the different AI tools in a pretty simple way. So this is really exciting. There are more possibilities that we can do with the MCP server. We have seen before in the MCP inspector things like the prompts or the sampling. We can keep watching more content related with MCP in upcoming videos if you are interested to learn more about it. Thanks so much for watching this video. I truly hope this content has been useful and you gained valuable insights to apply in your journey. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop for upcoming content. I have plenty of more exciting topics coming to your way. So feel free to like, comment, share your thoughts, and let me know what you love to see next. Until then, keep learning and happy coding.